Amy and I were identical twins, and when we were in my mom's stomach, our umbilical cords, which are like your supply of blood and oxygen, got tied in a knot, and so her brain didn't get enough blood or enough oxygen, and so it caused brain damage.
Has a problem. His cows like to type all day long. He hears click clack, move, click clack, move, click clack.
Did they all go around?
I don't think I had a lot of awareness of the difference between my family and other families for a pretty long time. I had no reason to know that it should be any other way to have a sister like Amy, and that wasn't something that all of my classmates knew about. And there was a lot of time when I started to figure that out as I got older. And that was especially going to a school that did not allow any students with any sort of disability. I think now in the 5th grade, there's a student with spina bifida, but up until then, there were no students who had any sort of disabilities, so none of my classmates had any exposure. I mean, why would they have? I think a lot of people talk about their siblings with disabilities like, oh, they're so inspirational, they do so many amazing things, blah, blah, blah. And that's true, but that's not true 100% of the time. That's not how you feel every single day. And I think a lot of what was hard for me when I was younger was understanding that Amy had more needs than I did, and that just because she got more attention didn't mean that she was more special than I was to my parents, or that they didn't love me as much as they loved her. And I think for me, there was a lot of resentment sometimes about not being able to sit down as a family and have a normal dinner as my classmates did, or not being able to go places and have it be as easy as it is for other people, those kinds of things. Not being able to have my sister come to school events because she might not be able to sit through it, things like that. When you have 3 kids who all want your attention, but one of them is having a seizure, that's the first person who gets your attention, for obvious reasons. And I think there's a difference between understanding that, rationally, and understanding that emotionally. And I always understood, I was never like, oh, my parents are terrible, they never want to pay attention to me. I always understood that they, sometimes they had things they needed to do for Amy, and that of course I wanted them to do that. I didn't want anything to happen to her. But I feel like I didn't fully emotionally accept that until I had the opportunity to talk about it to someone who I knew I wouldn't offend by saying anything. And I think a lot of it was that I felt like I wasn't supposed to resent Amy for these things. And that wasn't it's not Amy's fault, so I can't be upset about it. But when I started seeing this therapist, she was like, oh no, of course you can feel upset about it. You should feel upset about it. And that's okay to feel that way. And no one would be upset if you told them that you felt that way. And I guess I was scared that it would, that my parents would think that I thought it was Amy's fault or something like that. And I think being able to talk to someone else about it helped me realize that that's just how I felt, and it was okay to feel that way. And it didn't mean that I didn't love Amy, and it didn't mean that I didn't understand that it wasn't her fault, but that sometimes you just feel the way you feel, and that it's okay. And I think there was a time when I couldn't talk about Amy very well without feeling like I was gonna cry, or not about Amy, but about these feelings that I had associated with her. And going to see this therapist really helped me. I can talk about it now, and that's not something that I could do before. And I think that was really useful. And I don't think that it was in any way that I guess I wouldn't say that it was through anybody's fault that I had to see a therapist. I really think that sometimes having an outside perspective really helps, just because they can be like, you're not crazy for feeling that way, and no one is going to be mad at you for feeling that way. And you're like, oh, okay, it's going to be okay. When I was in high school, we had this day where we wouldn't do any of our classes. It was called Diversity Day. And one of the many things that happened on that day was these breakout sections where you would choose a certain part of yourself to identify with and go to a group of people who also identified with that. So there was lower class, middle class, upper class, like every race, religion, etc. And one of the options was family member with a disability. And there were 3 or 4 of us there, and actually one of my teachers, and we all cried. And it was it was just so, like, there's nobody else who understands what that's like. And to know that there were other people at my school, even though none of their siblings were there, just knowing that there were other people who knew what it was like was amazing. It was so helpful. And having those people to validate the way that you feel, and having them be able to say, yeah, that sucks. Oh, yeah, when we went to the grocery store and they had a meltdown, that was embarrassing. And to be able to talk about those things without feeling guilty for how we felt about them was so powerful. And I think I really wish there was more programming around that, because it's just incredible. I mean, in the same way that parents encouraging parents helps parents, I really think siblings need that sort of support as well, because a lot of times there aren't that many people that you can talk to who would understand, and especially as a kid, you don't have a way to connect with other people like that very easily. And so I think those are just really, really useful experiences. I believe that language is incredibly important, because the way that we talk about things, consciously or unconsciously, really shows how we think about them. So I'm a big believer in people first language, and I really had a really hard time with the word retard, and having my classmates say, that's retarded, like, oh, you're so retarded, like, that drove me crazy, and I would get really, really upset with them about it. And it took me a while to have the ability to be like, okay, but they haven't grown up with a sister like Amy, and they don't know, and it's not their fault that they don't know. And instead of getting angry, I should be like, hey, just so you know, when you say this word, you're using my sister as a bad thing, and you're saying, oh, that's retarded, like, it's another way, you're using it as a synonym for stupid or bad, and my sister is not stupid or bad, but to use it as an opportunity to educate rather than to get angry. This woman was someone who came to our camp. She was like a leader of an external group, having supposedly adapted the program that they run for typical kids for teenagers with disabilities. And this was not the first year she'd done it. And I was kind of like, you've been doing this for how many years? Like, you don't have the excuse that my classmates have of just not having the exposure. You have the exposure, and that's not okay. And so the camper that I had that week had a power chair, and I think her power chair is so cool because she doesn't have the motor skills to be able to use the toggle, but they've designed her chair so that she can still operate it by using buttons on the side of her head. So one button turns left, one button goes forward, one button goes right, and then there's a button on the hand thing that goes left. And I think that that's an amazing tool for her to be able to be in control of her own mobility and to have that ability. And the whole point of this program was that it was a leadership program. But it did take Kesley a while longer to be able to go places, because instead of just being able to move the toggle, she had to, every time she wanted to steer, she had to stop moving so she could turn and then keep moving. And so it would take us 20 minutes to get to breakfast. And that was fine with me. We'd wake up early, we'd get going, whatever. I just that's how she's going to do it. There's no reason not to do it that way. That's how Kesley gets to breakfast. We're going to get to breakfast that way. And this woman would make comments about us being late, or, oh, let's hurry up. Oh, we don't want to be late for breakfast. We're getting behind schedule, all of these things. And it made Kesley feel really stressed out. And she kept apologizing to me for being late. And I was like, you have nothing to apologize for. We're going to get there when we get there. And that's fine. And I don't worry about it. You don't need to worry about it. It's fine. And this woman kept making comments about it, and eventually we were headed to breakfast on one of the last days, and she came up and she was like, Meg, why don't you drive Kesley's power chair for her so that we get there faster? And I was like, first of all, Kesley can hear you, and you don't need to talk to me when she's right here as if she's not here. And second of all, this is a leadership program. Kesley can drive her own this is a leadership program, and Kesley can drive her own power chair, and I'm not going to take that ability away from her just because you want me to get there faster. And I was so angry that she would say that, but I think that's the sort of thing that I've learned, I'm not okay with people doing that, and I don't have a problem telling them that. And I think had it been someone who did not have the same level of exposure to disability, I probably would have been like, hey, by the way, like, this is a different way you could say that wouldn't come off, you know. But with her, I was just like, this is not acceptable. Having just the fundamental attitude about disability that I don't think necessarily has to stay with disability. So the fact that I look at Amy and I never think she can't. I'm always like, yeah, she can. How are we going to make it happen? And the summer camp I worked at had that exact philosophy. The question was never, can this camper do the ropes course? The question was, how are we going to make it happen for this camper? And I think that general assumption of ability, we started from the assumption that this kid is going to do it. And then we worked to find the tools to make it happen. And I think that is not the view that most people have. They see a wheelchair and they think can't. And they see, they see characteristic, like, physical things that tell them Down syndrome and they think can't. And it's like, why? Why not? There's no reason that it shouldn't happen. The reason that it doesn't happen is that you think can't. And it's your attitude that stops people from being able to do things. And so I think that's something that I learned from watching Amy defy people's expectations over and over and over. And I think for a while it bothered me when, I'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to miss class today. I'm going to my sister's graduation. And people's response is, wow, your sister's graduating from high school? That's so great. And I'm like, why? You wouldn't be surprised if I told you my brother was graduating from high school. Why does it have to be such an amazing accomplishment that she is? If you didn't, and the reason it's an amazing accomplishment is that you don't think she's capable of that. And I think that basic attitude just is not something that I grew up with. And I think that doesn't necessarily need to stay with disability. That can be with anything. I think that people are never going to be able to perform to their full capability if you make assumptions that they're not going to. And so I think in any realm, that's a really useful worldview. Explaining Amy to people is impossible. Now that I'm in college, it comes up as, oh, do you have any siblings? Oh, you have a twin sister. Where does she go? And I'm always like, well, she goes swimming. She goes horseback riding. She goes and does pottery, Just Amy is not describable. People need to meet her to understand what she's like. People will say, you're so lucky to have a sister like Amy. And for a long time, I felt that way sometimes, but not all the time. And I was sort of like, well, you can say that, but you're not living it. But now I feel very lucky. But there were times when I didn't feel lucky. And it definitely was a process. I can look back and sort of compare my childhood to other people's childhoods and realize how much I learned from it and how much it matured me as a person and all of the valuable skills that I've learned and just how the way that I see the world is different from people who didn't grow up with a sister like Amy. But that wasn't something that I was able to realize, obviously, as a young child. And now I feel incredibly lucky to have a sister like Amy.